Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the channel. Today's episode is another banger with Theo Lucier. This will be the third segment in this biohacking series. In today's episode, we're going to be diving into the occulted topic of health dowsing. This was an absolutely fascinating and very mind-blowing conversation that we had. And do make sure you watch all the way to the end as I had Theo go ahead and do a demonstration of this. So be sure you watch the entire episode. I think you're going to love this one. That's coming up next. Alright, welcome into the channel for another episode, joined by Theo Lucier for part 3 in this biohacking self-health journey, so to speak. And so I'm very excited to have him back on. He always has lots of great information to share that's pretty much instantly usable. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into that. Welcome back to the channel, Theo. It's been a little bit.
Thanks for having me. I always really appreciate being a guest on your show, and I really appreciate your perspective on things. And this is a wild and interesting and super useful topic that I think most people probably haven't heard of. And it's simultaneously really old and really new. So I'm excited to talk about it.
And that topic is health dowsing. Is that right?
Yeah. So essentially, and that's a term that, not a lot of people, it probably won't resonate with too many people. You say, well, health dowsing, what is that?
Yeah. When
I
I think of dowsing, I think of like dowsing rod, like how you find water, that sort of thing. But I mean, just so the audience is clear, I don't know anything about this topic as well. So Theo's just gonna take us to school all the way through it.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. I mean, that's a great place to start, is looking for water, right? It's weird. You can find water hundreds of feet underground, and most people think of somebody carrying dowsing rods. They're called swing rods or L rods, and they cross over the water. That, believe it or not, is actually one of the easiest forms of dowsing to learn. People can usually pick that up in a matter of hours. If their mind doesn't get in the way.
If they're thirsty enough.
Yeah, and you kind of have to be able to formulate the intention to find what you're looking for with your left brain, the logical thinking part, and then you kind of release it to your right brain, which is the intuitive kind of part that connects with source. And so I hope I'm not, losing people already, but
Not really here. Simple. I don't think so.
Yeah. Okay, good. A really easy way to think about it is these different dowsing instruments, whether they're the swing rods or a pendulum or a Lequer antenna or an aurimeter or a bobber or all these different things we're going to talk about. They're like needles or indicators on a gauge. They're like the speedometer needle in your car. Okay. Your nervous system is actually the really sophisticated instrument that is picking up these subtle energies and reading it. And the pendulum or the dowsing rods are an indicator. They're just like a tool that indicates. They don't have any special abilities on their own. And you can literally, cut a branch off a tree and use that and it'll work. You can use an acrylic pendulum. You can use a copper one. You can use a crystal one. It doesn't matter. I mean, there's people that use pendulums made from a nut hung on some fishing line or a piece of string or thread. It's just an indicator. So I got into this by, for a couple summits I did, I interviewed somebody named Holland Franklin. And she's pretty well known in the subtle energy world in the United States, but especially Southern California. And she is also an EMF mitigation expert. And that's what I was interviewing her on. And she said at the end of the interview, she said, She said, I know you didn't want to talk about this while we were recording because you're not sure about it, but you should know that you're never going to be able to fully mitigate EMF unless you deal with the subtle energy part of it. And I said, well, what is that? And she said, have you ever heard of scalar waves? And I said, I have, but I don't know what they are. And she said, well, every electromagnetic wave has a scalar wave to it. Sometimes it's called a longitudinal compression wave, but it carries information. And you can block EMF pretty easily. You can just use a piece of tin, or if you're wearing clothing, you can do like silver fabric and it'll block the electromagnetic component, but it won't block the scalar energy component. It won't block the information. It goes through anything because it doesn't travel in the third dimension. It travels in the fourth. And I really struggled with this at first. I thought it was bullshit. So having a curious mind and always wanting to optimize my health, I was open to it. So I researched it, and it turns out that there was a guy named James Clerk Maxwell. He is the founder of modern physics. All physics, basically from the 1850s onwards, is based on the mathematics that James Clerk Maxwell first articulated. So Heinrich Hertz. So when you think of hertz or cycles per second, how we measure EMF waves, Hertz's mathematics were based on Maxwell's, and Einstein's math is based on Maxwell's. So both Heinrich Hertz and Einstein in their original field equations for the theory of electromagnetism included scalar waves because Maxwell had scalar waves in his original math. For political reasons, both Hertz and Einstein took them out. Einstein gave several speeches where he includes scalar waves. Hertz's early work includes it, but they took them out for political reasons because the instrumentation of the time was unable to measure it as far as like scientific instrumentation. Nowadays, there actually are a few scientific instruments that can measure them, but they're super expensive, typically only found in laboratories, and most of the research that has been done in that realm was done by the Soviets and now the Russians. So that's where all that is. So that is the basis of essentially what we're talking about, is everything gives out essentially an informational wave or a scalar wave, and that is measurable. And not only is it measurable, but it's transmissible. There's certain devices that can transmit it. Some people can do it just with the palms of their hands. Some people don't need any dowsing instruments. They can literally use their body. There's water dowsers that can feel underground running water. Some of them get emotional. Some of them feel it as a tension in their nervous system. So they don't use any rods at all. So kind of got into it from an EMF harmonization and mitigation perspective. And I learned how to do that in my house and kind of check things using a pendulum and then harmonize it. And there's a couple really easy, simple ways to do that. And then I got in. Go ahead.
Well, before we continue, can we maybe just kind of outline what is the basic science of how this works, whether you're dousing for water or using in the applications that we'll get to for health reasons?
Yeah.
What is it that is calibrating or like tuning some type of instrument to interact with these invisible scalar waves that can kind of give a informational feedback that can be used? Like, what is the kind of the mechanistic description of that?
It's a really good question. And it's still something that is debated a lot.
Yeah, we don't know how it works. We just know that it works.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of it, right? So what's interesting is, so the Europeans developed a whole science around this, and it's called a pseudoscience if you look it up online. But it's called radiesthesia. And radiesthesia attempted to take the quantitative method of the modern scientific method and apply it towards the qualitative aspects of dowsing. So just for people listening, it's like a really simple way to explain the difference. So quantitative is I just consumed 6 grams of sugar in this drink that I had. And qualitative is this drink that I just had is very sugary. Sugary is a quality. And so what is sugary for you might not be sugary for somebody else. It's a qualitative thing. So in dowsing,
It's kind
you're
of like
measuring.
objective versus subjective as well.
Yeah. Yeah, but the Europeans, they did actually figure out how to make it more scientific. And the American or North American system, both Canadian and US, so we'll say North American system, it's extremely intuition based. So it's not radiesthesia at all. It's just all feeling and intuition, which is really interesting. You think it would be the opposite with Europe kind of being the old world. You would think they would be the ones where it's all intuition and feeling, but it's the opposite. But the Europeans have some really cool instruments that they use, and they help to remove intention out of it a little bit or a lot, depending on what you're using. And they literally just measure it. Well, I'll show you one of those instruments in a little bit here.
Okay.
So yeah, that's as far as how it works. There's different theories about it. So the European radiesthesia world essentially says that everything emits rays of information, like scalar waves, and through a combination of intention and the way the instrument is set up and your nervous system, you can pick up and detect these waves and in some cases transmit them. So that's like radiesthesia. It's everything's emitting all these rays. In the North American system, it's similar, but it's more based on the nervous system picking up stuff in the field, basically. And it's more intuition. Like the most famous American dowser of all time, Vern Cameron, his personal belief was that it was source. So it was whatever source is for you, God, a guardian angel. He thought it was a guardian angel in his case, would go out and find the information and bring it back to you. That's it, because there are cases in dowsing that are quite interesting, that are very well documented and have been for decades. If you try to use dowsing to predict the future, specifically with gambling, you'll lose your ability to do it.
See, this is really
Isn't that?
interesting because this
Yeah.
is almost kind of a liminal space between health, which is a scientific field or considered such,
Mm-hmm.
and just straight up magic, which is something we discuss a lot on this channel.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's almost like when Obi-Wan Kenobi says stretch out with your feelings,
Mm-hmm.
because you have to feel the force. It's a feeling thing. And,
Yes.
the force from an animistic perspective, which is what I both carry myself and speak about on this channel, is essentially seeing yourself as not only like a part of nature, but like it's all one thing. Like you are
Yes.
it and it is you. So if you have this mindset, then you can extend your consciousness into the field because it's all you. So you
Yes.
you have that ability, but it has to be, developed, especially in modern society when it's just like this atrophied aspect of ourselves.
Correct. Yeah. So if you get into the biogeometry system in the main book they use, they talk about how very early humans, and I know there's a lot of different ideas on timelines here, so let's not get into that, but let's just say like very early humans, they're all right brain. They were all feeling and intuition.
Mm.
And over time, we've become more left brain and we've kind of lost a lot of that. But what's a good example that most people resonate with that everyone's experienced? Have you ever thought of somebody and then had them call or text you?
Oh yeah, totally.
That's yeah. So that those are scalar waves. They travel in the
Hmm.
fourth dimension. They're outside the third dimension, so they're instantaneous.
Some might
Think
call
of
that the quantum field of like collective consciousness or something like that. Would you kind
yes,
of consider that being the same thing? Because again,
same thing.
taking
Source.
it back to
Yeah,
first principles, the first principle of natural law is mentalism. Everything is mind. The
yeah,
entire
yeah.
all of reality is the mind of God, essentially. So of
It sounds
course
like you've
it's
read the
all.
Kabbalion.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the all mind.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, that's the all mind. It's source. It's universal consciousness, which we're all immersed in this pool.
Right. It
Um,
wouldn't be the all if we were something else other than it, right? The only way for it to be the all is to be including everything.
right, exactly. So, what I find fascinating about these different styles of dowsing is that it's kind of like, I mean, those of us that have done intentional psychedelic work, you can access source that way, but you are actually accessing source when you
Mm.
douse, and you don't have to be on psychedelics. And like over time, the more you do it, the more your intuition gets better.
Mm-hmm.
I think because you
Totally.
develop a better connection with the all mind, or whatever you want to call it. Another example that most people will know is that you can feel somebody looking at you from behind.
Yeah.
You can feel their gaze. And the Greeks actually believed that the eyes emitted rays. And that's why you could feel that. Other schools will say that it's the thought energy, and it just goes out into the field, and then you're picking up their thought energy. The field of the heart is now measurable with traditional scientific
Mm.
instruments. They're sensitive enough now, and it goes out about 8 feet from the chest, and a
In
big
all directions.
toroidal, yeah, a big
Mm-hmm.
toroidal field, and that field contains information, and they're able to measure that. They don't know what it means, but there's information in that field as well. So that's my personal belief after doing this for years and reading everything I can get my hands on. I think the detecting instrument is our nervous system. It's our brain and some scalar quantum energy component of our nervous system that we don't yet quite have the science to describe. And then the dowsing rods or pendulums or whatever you're using it's just a needle on a gauge. It's just indicating that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's easy, it's fun, it's all you have to do is just decide what you want to do, set the tension, just completely release it, and just you hold the mental question, oh, I wonder what's going to happen here, and
Mm-hmm.
then you get your answer.
Well, I was
So
thinking again,
yeah,
we were just talking about this kind of uncanny connection to magic. And, a wand is a typical instrument used in magic, which is really not that unlike a dowsing rod. And it's
actually
not the
they're
wand itself that has the power, it's
correct.
you, but
Yeah,
it's an extension.
yeah, exactly. And actually, there is a type of like really old school and traditional dowsing instrument called a wand.
Yeah,
Sometimes it's called a bobber, but it's a really long stick shaped like an L. And there's a very famous dowser named Lloyd Mears. He's no longer with us, unfortunately. But he created an entire system that is so fascinating. It'll just blow your mind. It's called energy balancing by numbers. And what Lloyd did is he dowsed over 4,000 numbers that correspond to different subtle energy qualities that heal the human body. Um, and he used a wand, literally a wand. And there's one video of him on YouTube, only one, and he's bobbing the wand up and down. And then when it stops is when he got a hit. And so he's able to figure out these numbers, and that system is still around. And people either repeat the numbers orally to get the vibration of them into their body, or they write them down on a slip of paper and put them on their body. Now, I mean, that's
fascinating.
just sounds absolutely wild, but there's a long tradition of numerology, and
Numbers are very occulted.
Yeah, and the Hebrew language, with the numerology in there, and I mean,
gematria.
Yeah, exactly. So like nobody knows about this system that
Even
Lloyd
the
came
words
up
we
with.
speak can be broken down into numbers.
Yes.
Like it's
Yeah.
like the language of the universe, mathematics, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah, and Lloyd was it was a funny thing about him is that he was like a chemical engineer for a mining company, and he knew that when you would pan for gold in streams, and the gold would come back a few years later, even though there was no source of gold upstream. And so through an alchemical process, it would spontaneously come into being through these specific isotopes that were found in the stream. And that led to him dowsing these numbers out based on isotopes. And then he applied those to the human body. I mean, hardly anybody knows about energy balancing by numbers, but it's still out there. You can buy the manual. You have to have some dowsing ability to use it, but it's still out there. In Russia, they had a version of that. They're called, I think, Grabovoi numbers. Similar concept, actually. But we're getting in the weeds here. I don't want to confuse people, because I want to just keep it practical and just say, hey, like you can literally use dowsing to diagnose yourself. You can ask questions. You can measure energetic qualities of the room that you sleep in and see if it needs any adjustments. You can check the vitality of food. I mean, there's so many cool things you can do.
Yeah, that's so fascinating, and both telling. Well, what am I trying to say? It's fascinating, but telling that I've not heard any of this before. Like it sounds so interesting and amazing, especially
Right.
the practical uses of this, and yet, I mean, I'm sure like only a small percentage of people even know about this stuff.
Yeah, I think it's the closest thing you can get to magic, or one of the closest things you can get to magic in the three-dimensional realm. I mean, because it literally, if you trust the process, it's amazing. You're just like, oh my God, this like blows me away. I mean, like you can use a pendulum or something called Lequer Antenna, which is a specialized type of dowsing rod, to find magnetic north, and it'll just hit like that, and you're like, how the heck, like, why, how does that even work? It's
Wow.
magic. It's just crazy. But let's start with some basic stuff. So I brought some pendulums. I've many different kinds. So here's one from a system it's basically from the 70s and 1980s. So this pendulum here, let's see if I can get it to focus. I'll cover my face. Is it? It's not quite
No,
doing it. This
maybe
is
a
a
little.
res.
There we go. That's
There we
yeah.
go.
There it is.
There it is. So this is
That's cool.
a special type of resin in here, and it has microcrystals in it. So this is a self-cleaning pendulum, because some pendulums can pick up charge, but the basics of a pendulum are, if it spins clockwise, that's a yes, and if it spins counterclockwise, that's a no.
Hmm.
And so you can ask it questions that are yes, no questions, and you can receive an answer. Where does the information come from? Well, that's the all mind. It's your intuition. It's what your intuition connects to. It's like your gut feeling. Like, what does that connect to, right? And you can use a pendulum like this to check spin in a room. So here there's a lot of EMF going on, but I set up an energetic broadcast with an antenna in front of this. Let's see what direction it goes in here. So it looks like my broadcast is working. Oh, no, it's going left. So this indicates like a super strong EMF field, and see how it's tick-tocking, it's switching directions. So that's Wi-Fi. So Wi-Fi will put out a signal like that. It'll go left and then it'll go right, and go left and it'll go right. And so a very basic way to use a pendulum is to make different changes in your room and see if it will go clockwise, because you want it to go clockwise. That's a beneficial energy pattern. And so what could I do here in the office? Well, I mean, you would want to shut off the Wi-Fi first. If you
Mhm.
can't do that, there's different harmonization things you can do for Wi-Fi. So for an example, for $8, you can get some biogeometry stickers. It's called the L90 or the L66, and you can put them on there. And believe it or not, they actually imbue a subtle energy quality into the Wi-Fi that changes it into an actual beneficial type of energy. And then this thing will
What?
start spinning.
So I
Yeah,
need
it'll
to
start.
get one for my little hotspot in the truck here.
Yeah, you know what's fast? You do. So the biogeometry system, for people listening, the easiest way to explain it is basically think of a guy that was just completely obsessed with subtle energy and dowsing in the European radiesthesia system. And he went out and he mastered that, and then he studied all the other systems he could find, and then he took the very best and he created his own system called biogeometry, which his system focuses heavily on how three-dimensional shapes affect subtle energy. Um, and so he thankfully like created an extremely cost-effective system where he figured out these angles and shapes that you can put on Wi-Fi, you can put on your cell phone,
Hmm.
and it'll change the Wi-Fi wave into a carrier wave of something beneficial versus something negative.
Right. And we
Um,
touched on that in the previous episode. So anyone listening to this, if you haven't, go back and watch part 1 and 2. Absolutely incredible stuff. Also just very practical, going through detox and then starting to get into some of this stuff in the last one. And yeah, great.
Yeah, I mean it's fun stuff, and so if you look up the Pulsar system, the way it's spelled is Pulsor. Holland Franklin's probably the greatest living expert on it that we currently have. It's like a very cult system. It's like hardly known by anyone. The guy that created it, unfortunately, is no longer with us, and he was pretty underground when he did. Um, but her website, hollandfranklin.com, has a lot of good articles that are just helpful. She's not even selling anything. It's just like she's like, hey, here's how this works. But um, in that system, it has charts of the human body. They're kind of based on Chinese medicine, but the different chakras in people have characteristic spins, directions they're supposed to spin.
Hmm.
For men and women, they're different on the center line. They're the same on the periphery.
Oh, that's
And in the
interesting.
pulsar system, they're called vortex energy centers. But you
The
can take
word
your,
the word chakra actually means wheel. So of course, that makes a lot
yeah,
of sense that it's
spinning.
spinning. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can take this and you can check spins on your vortex energy centers
Wow.
or your chakras, and you can actually check the spin of different organs. So I have a friend who has a lot of heavy metal toxicity, and her poor liver has been really struggling as she does her heavy metal detox. And typically, the polarity on her liver is flipped, so it's spinning the wrong direction. And interestingly enough, with the pendulum, you can diagnose that, but you can also flip the polarity back to where it's supposed to be by
Just
letting it spin. Yeah.
just with the pendulum?
Yeah. Just the pendulum, and any pendulum. It doesn't have to be this one. The spinning motion itself corrects the underlying subtle energy quality of the organ. And for people listening, I know this sounds like a lot. There's a guy named Dr. Jerry Tennant. He wrote a book called Healing is Voltage. Um, really kind of famous book in underground health circles. And in Jerry's practice, all his doctors use a pendulum for diagnostics, and they check all the chakras and they check the organ systems. And if the polarity is flipped, what Jerry found out is that the body won't accept electrical charge. So Healing is Voltage is a book he wrote. So basically his whole thing is adding electrons back into the body, like literally DC microcurrents to charge up the cells. And what he found is if the polarity is flipped on, say, the liver, and you're trying to help the liver, it won't accept a charge until you flip the polarity back. So in his practice in Texas, these are medical doctors, they use pendulums.
Hmm.
John Hopkins University, under one hospital administrator who had an interest in this for about a decade, used pendulums and muscle testing in their oncology department. And they had a higher success rate determining the size, location, and type of cancerous tumors than they did with MRIs and other various types of scans.
Man.
And in Japan, nationwide, they use a system of muscle testing. The one that looks like this, where it pulls. They use that as a medical diagnostic, and they've been doing that since the 80s. So it's really fascinating. So that's just the pendulum, and there's various types of pendulums. You can literally take a nut and use some thread, and you can use a pendulum for yes/no questions. And the quality of the question is going to determine the quality of the answer. So an easy way to get around this, and I recommend anybody get this book. This book was written by a guy named Dale Olson, and it's called The Pendulum Charts. And what Dale did is he put together all these different charts. Here's a really good one. So here's a metal toxicity chart. So you can use a pendulum with this chart. It's called a fan chart. And he's got the questions in the top there. So one of the questions, it says, this body has an excess of what metal? And so he's got all the heavy metals on here, right? And you can have the pendulum indicate to you as a diagnostic what metals you're going to have too many of. And I can tell you, I did this chart, and then I had some metals, actual like scientific metals testing done on myself, and it lined up exactly with what I dowsed from this chart. Pretty wild, right?
Yeah.
And so, it's just crazy. So like there's everything in here. There's systems of the body. You can see where a health problem might be. This one is your immune system chart, and you can kind of figure out what's going on there. There's source of the condition chart, origins of disease, chronic fatigue, and then it even goes into like some esoteric stuff. There's like relationship compatibility charts. There's healing remedies where you can use it to choose a homeopathic remedy or a Bach flower essence. There's what's going on in the emotional body charts. There's literally a chart for anything. There's even like self-help ones, like what am I telling myself? So if you have like limiting beliefs or emotions that don't serve you that you might not be aware of, this will surface them. And you say, oh, cool. Like I have a lack mentality. I didn't know that. Maybe I should work on that.
Wow.
So
that sounds incredible, man.
For whatever this book costs, $10 or something. It's The Pendulum Charts, Volume 1 by Dale W. Olson. It is worth it. Because you're going to find out stuff that you would normally, you'd have to, I don't know how else you'd find it out. Maybe take some psychedelics and go through a journey and like go through that process, or hire a therapist and try to tease it out over years of therapy.
Exactly.
But this is a way to commune with your unconscious and source like very quickly. And so a pendulum for that is, it's so cool that you can even do that. And so those are some of the simple ways to use a pendulum as a diagnostic. Now, if you want to get into a little bit more of the European stuff, so I brought this along. So we're going to talk about the Lequer Antenna. So this is from a French system. It's called ACMOS. It's an acronym in French. Not entirely sure. Can't remember the exact thing, but this is a graduated dowsing rod. So it looks like this. I've got to flip out the arms here, but for people that are listening to this, this basically kind of looks like a Y. So it looks like a dowsing rod. It looks like a ruler, and it has numbers on the ruler, and then it has two little arms, and you hold it like this, um, like a normal kind of Y dowsing rod. And if you get an answer, it flips down, and if you don't get an answer, it doesn't move. And so what the Europeans did with this is each one of these numbers corresponds to a subtle energy quality. So to give an example, like 7.8 is running water underground. And so you can hold it out like this, and if you cross the stream, it'll flip down like that. And then you can also use it to figure out the depth of that stream, how much water is flowing per like gallons per minute, all that. From a health perspective, you can use this for a lot of things. So, like if you want to go into a room and find some source of EMF, there's a setting for that. It's 9.1. Also 7.8. You can look for different types of EMF and track it down. You can test a room's energetics. So you can test the upper corners in a room. That's number 12, and that's connection to source, basically. And then you can test the bottom corners for 8, and that's earth connection. And you want both connections. You want heaven and earth, and you want it balanced. The balance between the two is 15.3. So you can evaluate a room for all these subtle energy qualities and see if it's balanced. And I tested this when I was in Minnesota. The house was like super balanced. It like had great connection to source. It had great connection to earth, like 15.3, which is the balance between the two, is like spot on, perfect. I had to go to a industry seminar in Las Vegas. I don't know why they felt the need to have it in Las Vegas, but here we were, and I was in one of those giant, casino hotel towers, way far off the ground. So I checked 12 connection to, source, and it was high, right? I'm like off the ground. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. I checked 8 in the bottom corners for earth connection. It was 0. It was completely flat. It just didn't exist. And I was like, wow, this is super interesting. I haven't seen this before. With the Lequer antenna, the Europeans figured out that you can impose subtle energy qualities. So this isn't just a detector, it's a transmitter. It's always transmitting subtle energy qualities. And so you
Wow.
can actually do a procedure where you impose earth energy in the corners, and then you can actually ask it, like, how long does this last? Minutes, hours, days, and it'll tell you, and then when you need to re-up it. And so the French, through the system called ACMOS, built out an entire health system based on just this one instrument. It's also used in geobiology, which we'll talk about next. But in the ACMOS system, this is used as a diagnostic to look inside the body and then shift energy blocks and remove them and add beneficial energies, remove ones that are not. And you can use this to measure foods, supplements, anything really. You can detect, there's a setting for anything. I mean, there's a setting for candida. You can check somebody for candida using this. I think that
Wow.
setting's 3.33 on the scale. You can see if water's polluted. It's crazy. So this type of graduated dowsing rod with the numbers on it that looks like a ruler, this is radiesthesia. This is trying to remove the intention out of it and make it a little more scientific.
Mm.
And I think they did a pretty good job of it. Going back to the pendulum, because I again want to make sure that people can just do this, and preferably for free if they want to. If you make your own pendulum, say from a nut and a piece of thread or whatever, you can go online and you can download a chart called a Bovis scale. And Bovis was a French physician back in the 1920s. who wanted to evaluate the energetic quality of food that his patients were eating, because he tied their diet to how well they recovered from surgery, basically. And he wanted to make sure that the energetic quality of the food his patients were consuming was high. So he worked with an engineer, and they created a scale called a Bovis scale, or a Bovis meter. And it's actually measured in angstroms, which, if I remember correctly, I think is like a millionth of a meter. I can't remember exactly how they work that out, why they use that particular scale. I don't know. But what I can tell you is you can download a Bovis chart for free uh, pretty easily, and you can measure the energetic life force or vitality of a food or supplement like very quickly. You can even measure a room and see if it's helping you or hurting you. So 6,500 Bovis or Bovis units is neutral. So at 6,500, you're not gaining energy from the thing you're eating or the room you're sitting in, but you're not losing it either. Above 6,500, you're gaining energy. Below it, it's taking energy. And so the Bovis chart, once you learn how to use a pendulum, I mean, you can get an answer in seconds. So for a while, I was just obsessed with it. I was measuring all my supplements, and I was measuring
I would
food I
be
was
too,
eating.
man. I would be going crazy with that.
It was the coolest thing ever. And like, come to find out, people have been doing this 100 years. So once you start digging online, unfortunately, most of the books on it are in French, and a lot of them haven't been translated, but there's enough out there in English where, you can learn to use it pretty quickly. So I was measuring rooms, I was measuring foods, supplements. I was even checking stuff like my wristwatch, and come to find out, because my wristwatch is metal, it absorbed a lot of positive charge from the electromagnetic environment I'm in, and it actually was taking energy. And so, I had to go in and fix that. But that's called the Bovis chart, Bovis, and you use that with a pendulum. And all you do is it's typically a fan chart. Sometimes they're done in a line. If they're a fan chart, you just hold your pendulum at the bottom center of the fan. It looks like, think of a Chinese fan. And you just hold the intention, hey, I want to measure the Bovis units of this vitamin C that I got on Amazon. And it'll give you a score. The things that have scored the highest for me were, not surprisingly, probiotics, because they're
Mm.
literally alive. So of course they're
Hmm.
going to contain a lot of life force, right?
Yeah.
Um, the lowest scoring stuff was some gum that had aspartame in it. It
Oh
was
my
like
God.
way below six. Yeah, it was like 500 or something. It was like literally, it's like giving you cancer.
You're like,
Um,
oh.
yeah. And in some parts of Austria, where this type of methodology is popular, it's actually printed on the back of product labels, and it'll have the Bovis score on it,
Wow.
which I thought was really interesting. Yeah. The
Yeah.
Europeans they're into it. You never
Not
hear about it
something you
here.
see here, that's for sure.
Yeah. And here's something else that I think people listening will think is really neat. So here's another type of pendulum. So this is from the biogeometry system. This pendulum, let's see if I can get it to focus. There we go. So
Whoa.
it's got some discoloration there because I've used it a lot. But this pendulum was actually found in a tomb
Huh.
in Egypt, and each one of those rings and the point basically corresponds to a type of beneficial subtle energy quality. So this particular pendulum was actually designed for architects who don't dowse, who don't want to learn how to dowse and don't even believe in it. But it was designed for them to be able to go into a building or a room and measure the energy quality of it and see if they needed to make any adjustments to it
Hmm.
by moving furniture around, or like you can actually use this on blueprints too. So if you're designing a house, you can use this over the blueprint, and it'll tell you if it spins left or right, if it has good energy quality or ungood energy qualities. This is called a BG3 pendulum. And you can also use this to measure the energy quality of foods as well. I prefer the Bova scale because it's a lot faster. And honestly, if it takes forever, it's just not fun. It just gets old. But it's a useful system that they have on that.
Wow. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, it gets wild. I mean, it's
I'm loving it,
like
man.
if you, yeah. So, I mean, the health diagnostic stuff that I mainly do is I use this. So Dale Olson's book, there's a chart for everything in there. I mean, healing remedies. He's got cancer reversal in there, chronic fatigue. Like, what's the source of my chronic fatigue? You can go in there and look that up. And then when you figure that out, you can flip to a remedies chart, like a homeopathic or Bach flower essences or whatever, and it'll tell you which ones you need, which is pretty crazy. With the Lequer antenna, this one it gets complicated. I mean, you can see all the little numbers here, and all the stuff going on. But once you start to pick it up, it's really cool because you can do energetic adjustments and frequency transmission to anything. Like something that people might find really interesting is I have these blue light glasses with metal frames that I like to wear when I'm in front of a computer. And I heard a long time ago that those metal frames can pick up and concentrate EMF. And I was just like, oh, whatever, it's like, it's probably nothing. But I kept hearing about it and I'm like, man, I do feel a little off when I put these things on. So I measured them with the Lequer antenna, and sure enough, they had like a really unhelpful positive charge on them. And so I was able to clear that charge and impose a beneficial subtle energy quality onto the metal frames using this. And that's kind of the beauty of the Lequer antenna, is there's so many ways to use it.
Man, yeah, this is just mind blowing. And
It's crazy. Yeah.
I'm curious what the folks listening think about this so far. Drop a comment below if you appreciate what Theo's bringing. Drop a like down below as well. Hey guys, hope you're enjoying the episode so far. I just want to take a quick moment to offer you a special gift. It's the free initiation package download. This is a free download package that includes the Toolbox mini course. I created this package to equip you with all of the essential tools you need for any type of energetic or magical practice for anyone serious about their spiritual development. It's comprised of 3 parts: the circle, the breath, and the voice, where you'll learn how to cast the circle of the Magi, various breathwork techniques, including a powerful guided breathwork meditation, rune galler, and more. You'll also get access to the Inner Sanctum, our private Facebook group and Discord server, as well as some Wizard Factory wallpapers for desktop and mobile, all for free. And for those who've already seen this course, I'm happy to announce that this is a brand new remake with better production and even more information. You can find the link to get yours in the description below. So check it out and let's get back to the content.
One other topic I want to cover, but it's really important for people to know, and there's a cool story attached to it, if I can talk about geobiology for a little bit.
Yeah, let's get into it.
All right, perfect. So like, you coming from kind of the magic world and the esoteric world and like nature, kind of like the nature religion stuff, I'm sure you know about ley lines and earth energy grids and things of that nature, right? Like earth power spots. Yeah.
I'm familiar with it.
Yeah. So there's, fascinatingly enough, there are grids that cover the surface of the earth. I'm only going to talk about 2 of them because they're the ones that are the most impactful on us. But there's the Hartman Grid and there's the Curry Grid, and they're like a web of energy lines that cross the globe in like a net. In the European system, they're actually called nets. And so the Hartman grid is exactly north-south and east-west. And they're every 2 to 2.5 meters apart. So basically like 6.6 feet to like 7 some feet. And in nature, they're benign for the most part. They can pick up some geopathic stress. Running water underground actually is, from an energetic perspective, can be unhelpful. So if you have a house that's built on top of an underground stream, it actually can radiate unhelpful subtle energy qualities into the house, and it can cause cancer and all kinds of stuff. So Hartman lines were discovered by a doctor, Dr. Hartman. He's an Austrian guy. And he actually used babies in his experiment. I don't think they would do it today, but this was the 1950s. And he would put babies in a cart, and he would wheel them over the line, and they would start crying, and then he'd wheel them off, and then they would stop. And he just replicated it over and over again. And then they use all sorts of subtle energy detection techniques. And what he found out was...
So you're saying babies are the ultimate dowsing rods.
They're the detector, yeah. Yeah. So what Dr. Hartman figured out was that these lines carry information. And so by the 1950s, they didn't have the same EMF issues that we do, but they still had, electrical power. And so these lines will pick up your neighbor's Wi-Fi. They'll pick up electrical energy that's unhelpful, and they transmit the information from that. Again, going back to those scalar waves. And so if you live in a city, or if you live in a neighborhood, or if you live out in nature, but the Hartman line crosses an underground stream, it's going to carry some information that's not helpful. It can impact your health. And so Dr. Hartman wrote a book. It was Disease as a Problem of Location. And they would go out and they'd test people's houses, and they'd find out somebody had been sleeping on a Hartman line for years, and they had a health problem exactly where that line was. And where the Hartman lines cross, where they make a right angle, is not good. And here's what's going to blow your mind. Cats seek out Hartman line crossings in houses and sleep on top of them. They love them. Dogs will do anything to avoid sleeping on a Hartman line, especially a Hartman line crossing.
That's trippy. Why?
Isn't
I wonder
wild?
why that is. Why
I
cats
don't
like
know.
it and dogs don't.
Cats like discordant energy.
That makes sense.
Really weird.
They're psychos.
But it is known that cats basically can self-rife. Like if you think of rife machines, it's a frequency-based healing.
Right.
Cats are able to modulate the frequency of their purring, and they can actually like choose the appropriate healing frequency for themselves and do it. So some people think that cats go on those nodes, as they're known, the Hartman line crossings, and they're trying to neutralize them.
Wow. Maybe
It's
why the
wild.
Egyptians saw them as sacred.
Yeah, right? It's wild. And dogs will do anything to avoid them. They absolutely will not.
So I'm going to
sleep
need
on
to
'em.
start like checking each parking spot before I back in to sleep for the night. Just get
It's
out.
super fast.
Yeah, I'm just joking, but
Yeah.
it's just kind of a
No,
funny
you
idea.
can. You actually should. So I mean, it sounds crazy. When I sleep somewhere new, like a hotel room, like I did this when I was in Las Vegas, I actually checked to see what crossed the bed, the Hartman lines. And there was one that crossed right where my chest was. So, and there's various ways to deal with that, but you can detect them with the pendulum
Just get a
really
cat.
easily.
Sleep on your
Just
chest.
get a cat. Yeah, exactly. And the Lequer antenna, the setting for Hartman lines is 12.2, and it'll flip down when you cross it. Curry lines are different. They are spaced apart quite a bit, quite a greater distance, like over 20 feet apart, and they cross in an X. So if this is north-south and this is east-west, the Hartman lines are 45 degrees opposed to that. So like this. So, they go from, northeast to southwest and vice versa. They go in an X, and they're bigger, they're wider, and they carry more information and more energy. So it's definitely those are worth checking for too, except they're just not as many in the house, like, because they miss some houses completely. But when I was home, I was like, you know what? My mom's been sleeping in the same place for like 30 years, right? Like she's 78. It's just, she's been there forever. I was like, I'm actually going to check the Hartman lines in the entire house. So I did. And in this case, I was using dowsing rods. If you want to get started really easily, dowsing rods are super easy to use for Hartman lines because they cross in an X just like really fast. And they're pretty easy to learn. And I tested her bed, and she had a Hartman line crossing right where she slept. And I was like, hey mom, like, can you just like lay down how you normally sleep? I want to see where this is on your body. And it's exactly where her liver is. And she's had chronic liver problems for decades. She's always had a sluggish liver. And if you look at Dr. Hartman's book, Disease is a Problem of Location, that's exactly what he was talking about. Like someone's favorite chair could be on a Hartman line crossing.
Dude.
And it would have, it'd be giving them their body bad information, basically. And that was affecting their energetic blueprint, which then in turn adversely affects their physical blueprint. And, you know, neutralizing those is not hard. Basically, I traced the line to where it went outside, and I took a U-shaped wire cut to certain proportions and sunk it in the ground where it crosses it, and then it grounds the energy. It puts it back into the earth and it kind of cuts it. And so then that was, and also I tested that with the pendulum. After I found out the dowsing rods, I tested with the pendulum. The pendulum was going like counterclockwise, like crazy on that spot. And after I neutralized it, then it started going clockwise, which is a good way to test it. Another way to test it, another helpful method is like you can use a pendulum. You can find your resonant frequency, your own personal wavelength, they call it. And there's different ways to do this. They're all really easy. There's a great free YouTube video by a woman who has a channel called Intuitive Dowsing, and it's finding your personal wavelength. But if you find your personal wavelength on this chain and you hold it there, in general, it should go clockwise. But if you stand on a Hartman line, it'll go counterclockwise no matter what you do. And so then you can do various things to neutralize that, and then it'll go clockwise again.
Cool.
Yeah, it gets wild. And also, one other thing I want to pass on to people, because this is a really handy one. Once you find your personal wavelength on a pendulum, so it's basically you're going to find where on the chain is your own personal harmonic. You can test food or supplements really fast. So you can be in a store and you're like, oh, I really want those chips, but are they going to make me bloated or whatever? You don't even have to hold an intention or a question. You just hold it on the chain where your personal wavelength is. Like I marked this one with white out, so it's like about here, and you hold it over the package of food. And if it goes counterclockwise, you know it's not, you can't have it. It's not in resonance with your personal wavelength.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sounds like a rabbit hole you could just continue to go on.
You can get lost in it, man. It's like, I've actually had to push back against that because like I was taking all these courses and reading books and stuff, but my personal interest in it originally started because I know we talked about this briefly. As you know, I manufacture and sell supplements, and that means that I am talking to ingredient suppliers. And one of the challenges with the supplement industry is most ingredients come from sketchy places because they're cheap. So
they
most
have
of them
contaminants.
Right. They're from China or India. And of course, I always get the lab tests, right? That's a given. If you're selling supplements, you're usually going to have 1, 2. I prefer to have 3 independent lab tests that tell me what's going on in the supplement physically. But I also wanted to know the vitality or the energy of the supplement, because sometimes you get a supplement in the mail and based on the ingredients, it should have this amazing feel to it, and it just doesn't.
Hmm.
And you're like, what's going on? So I wanted a way to measure things energetically, so measure their vitality. So I started with a Bovis scale on a pendulum, which was really handy. And then the Lequer antenna is like that on steroids. But basically, I can measure things like really quickly. And I had so BioRecharge, the powdered humic supplement I make. um, I upgraded suppliers recently, and like I charted both of those ingredients. I measured the old one, I measured the new one, and the new one was higher across the board. I think because the sourcing's better. It's mined from underneath a sandstone cap. It's never exposed to any groundwater ever. It's not an open pit mine, and it's fully water processed. It doesn't use any acid at all in the final processing, which most humic companies do, and that always leaves a residue. So this doesn't have it. And of course, I saw that on the physical lab assay test, but energetically, you could see it. It got higher scores using 3 different methods. And I thought that was interesting. And some people listening, you're going to roll your eyes, and that's fair. I mean, it's absolutely fair. But you take supplements to feel better, right? And it's not like there's like units of feeling, it's just a quality. And so this is a way to kind of measure that, like, what are the units of feeling for this supplement? And so that's how I originally got into it, besides the EMF conversation I had with Hall and Franklin, where she's like, hey, you can block EMF all you want, but you're still going to be exposed to the bad information from it. Here's how you mitigate that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm excited to try the new formula because I just ordered a fresh batch. I
Yeah.
had the one, when you first started, and I had that, and I made it last for a pretty good while. And so
Yeah.
this will be my first time trying the new formulation. So really excited
Yeah,
to see.
thank you. Yeah, yeah, I'm getting really great reports on it. Most people say they feel it a little bit more, and actually, I had folks detox from it even more, where I had to adjust the amount slightly because people were detoxing too much from it.
Hmm.
And that's why I made the other pure fulvic supplement, Bio Boost, which I sent you as well, because that is more focused on the energy part. And in this case, when I say energy, I mean like electron donation. Like
Yes.
it has a lot of electrons, and it will offset that detox reaction for some people. But yeah, those were kind of my gateway. And then I found out you can use it as a diagnostic. And so I just love always trying to optimize myself, right? And so I started measuring myself and kind of figuring out what was going on. I mean, the last time I used this book, the Pendulum Charts, I had a suspicion I was deficient in some nutrient, but I didn't know what. So I used a chart on there, and sure enough, I was low in potassium, and I'd run out of potassium for a couple months. And I had recently done a lot of infrared sauna, but I wasn't re-upping my potassium. And it said, hey, you need potassium. So I went out and got my $5 bottle of potassium and started drinking it, and immediately felt better. I mean,
Wow.
is it psychophysiological, somatic? Maybe, but I don't think so. I mean, it's been right for me so many times. I'm like, why wouldn't I lean into my intuition and feeling and
Hmm.
use that? Of course, we love the scientific literature and
And
research and
man,
all that, but
isn't that the one thing that the doctors frown upon so much when you're trying to? I mean, they don't even care what you have to say about,
no.
they'll ask you a couple questions and then they're just going to run some tests and do their thing. But you try to tell them, well, like what your intuition is, and they're just going to be like, "Pff, get out of here." You know what I mean?
Oh, they have
I'm
no
the
time
doctor
for it.
here. Yeah.
Yeah. They have no time for it, which is interesting because in Japan, there's a form of muscle testing used, especially in oncology. It was used at Johns Hopkins for about a decade when they had an administrator in place that had a personal interest in it. And they did many clinical studies that were successful. Dr. Jerry Tennant down in Texas, they use a pendulum as a diagnostic right now. You can go there and go through their intake process and get diagnosed that way. So it's out there. But yeah, God forbid you bring this up in a medical setting, which is weird because ultimately, like, medical healthcare should be about feeling better. So why can't you use your feelings or intuition or connection to source to at least support a medical treatment?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, but I think for most people listening, if you just get into finding your personal wavelength on a pendulum, um, and then using that to very quickly survey whether a food or supplement is going to work for you is great. I literally do it all the time, and every time I've gone against a counterclockwise spin and bought something anyway, just because I wanted it, I felt not good afterwards, or at least got bloated from it.
Hmm.
So it's something I do pretty frequently, and I hide it when I'm in the grocery store, but I usually don't get spotted. I just do it really quick,
You
but over time
take
you
it
get
off in the
really
corner, and
fast.
you're like,
Yeah, exactly. I haven't busted out the Lequer antenna in a store yet. I think I'm good on that, but yeah, that's it. Only other thing I'll say is for people that are kind of skeptics about this, the greatest American dowser of all time, Vern Cameron, he was a water dowser. He also got very into dowsing people's auras in his later years. But in Southern California, there's a city called Lake Elsinore, and it's out in the desert. It's basically in the Mojave. It shouldn't even exist. But there's a lake there. And the question is how and why is this lake there? Well, there's always a little bit of a natural lake there. But in the 60s, there was some tectonic plate shifting, and the lake drained, and they lost their lake, basically. And Vern had been water dowsing in the Southern California area since the 1920s. And he even invented an instrument that you can still buy today, called the aurameter. It's called a Cameron aurameter, and it's really sophisticated, not easy to use. I have one, and it's sort of like a combination dowsing rod, pendulum, and wand. And he wrote a couple books on it, and I have them, and you can read them, and you can learn how to use it. And I still am practicing with it to get better at it. But long story short, the city of Lake Elsinore contracted Vern to basically fill the lake back up. And Vern was the first guy to really articulate the theory of primary water. Is that something that you've ever looked at?
no, what is that?
So we're taught that water is a scarce resource and it's disappearing all the time.
Hmm.
And it's a limited resource. And it's basically, we're taught this hydrological cycle of, like, the ocean evaporates, it goes into clouds, it rains, it goes down, and then it's that, right?
Right.
And they're trying to use water as a system of control and oppression for us now,
Absolutely.
by telling us that it's a limited resource. Vern said it's not. Vern said that there is a abiotic method of basically, like, geological factors create primary water deep in the earth, far below the regular aquifers. And the water is unlimited. It's created by pressure and some chemical reactions deep in the earth's crust. And it's always there, and it's easy to access, and it's unlimited. And the city of Lake Elsinore said, okay, prove it, fill the lake back up. So Vern went out there with his aurameter and his dowsing rods, and he found not one, not two, but three wells that produced over 5,600 gallons per minute. In fact, that was the limit of what the pump and the pipe capacity was able to handle. And those wells are still there today, and they're still producing today. And there's
Wow.
no way that the normal water table out there in the Mojave Desert would even support that. So it's primary water, and that lake is full today, and it's been full since the 60s. And those are very well documented water dowsing efforts by Verne. I mean, he went out there and he pinpointed the exact place, and he said, drill exactly right here, to reach this primary water. And there's thousands of wells here that shouldn't exist that Verne Cameron found. And you can still buy his books. There's a website called dowsing.com that Verne Cameron taught a guy named Bill Cox how to dowse, and Bill was already an author. So Bill wrote a couple books for Verne, and then Bill wrote his own books, and Bill's widow runs dowsing.com to this day. I mean, Davina's got to be in her 80s. I've talked to her on the phone a few times as I've bought all their books and stuff, and she still runs the site, and you can still buy a Cameron aurameter to this day. And the other famous story about Verne Cameron and dowsing, and this is documented, this is a real story, and this is besides finding water in the desert, which I think is pretty remarkable. Verne was contacted by the U.S. Navy to locate submarines. And so they tested him, and they said, well, we want you to locate Russian submarines, but first we want you to find all of the American submarines where they are anywhere in the world right now. And Verne was known for map dowsing. So he could take a map and he could find water on the map, gold, whatever. And he said, okay. And so he showed up. This is witnessed by like top brass in the Navy. It's documented, the whole thing photographed. And in under 10 minutes, he located all U.S. submarines accurately anywhere in the world. And he marked them on the map and handed it over to the Navy, and they verified it as accurate. And then he found all the Russian submarines, and then they never did anything with them. They never worked with them after that. But he was invited to a dowsing conference in South Africa many years later, and he tried to get a passport, and he was denied. He was banned from leaving the U.S. Because he was considered a security risk.
Wow, that's hilarious.
So that's kind of the most extreme map dowsing story that I've ever heard, but it is documented. It's a real story. There's like a letter from the Navy, like acknowledging it. So,
Yeah.
And that was in the 1960s, I believe. Yeah, mid to late 1960s.
Yeah, those are both great stories.
It's crazy.
And I would say, to anyone listening, and if you're still skeptical, but at least tell me you're curious. You can't not watch this whole episode and not be a little bit curious. So at the end of the day, just like anything we talk about here, just go and get yourself, this equipment is not expensive. Go out and see for yourself, test and experiment and play around, and then you'll know. And it doesn't matter if anyone else believes you, because then you'll be having the benefits in your own life. So,
and a wonderful thing is there's a lot of great information available on this for free. The community, the people that are actually into this are super helpful. Even on YouTube, there's some great information available for free. There's great blogs and websites on it. Unfortunately, there's not a ton of information on it in English. The Europeans, particularly the Austrians and the French, seem to be really hard into it, but there's enough out there.
Any bilingual French and English speakers out there, maybe that's your calling, is you can start translating more of these texts.
I know. I mean, I have one. Let's see, where is the card?
Or hell,
here?
Just run it through ChatGPT and translate them or something. That could be.
That's what I've been doing. I mean, here's a little card for the Lequer antenna, and you can see it's in French, this is corresponding to different organ systems, and you can see the settings over there.
I recognize a few.
Yeah,
ovaries, uterus.
Yeah. We did that one for fun, just to see. I measured a couple guys, and then I measured some women to see if it would flip down. But you can see here they have the geobiology. They have the Hartman lines and the Curry lines and the settings for those. So, they're a little more into it over there. But if nothing else, you can get into the mental dowsing where you ask yes, no questions, and it's kind of fun. And you'll be surprised at the answers you get. So that's always a good one.
Yeah. Well, hopefully the ones out there watching, you got at least with all of the we covered here today, quite a bit of different information. Pretty much most of it I haven't ever heard before. So hopefully something stuck with you and you get curious and maybe you can, apply it in your own life and get some benefits out of it. So,
100%. Yeah. And if you're looking for a way to cheaply and super effectively harmonize negative information from electromagnetic fields that you might be exposed to, I would look into the biogeometry system. It's pretty easy, at least the basics, and it's cost effective. A lot of the harmonization stuff out there is not cheap. But you can tool up in biogeometry for $20 and get yourself the shapes you need and slap them on your Wi-Fi and your computer, and you're
get your
good to
pendant
go.
that you're wearing right now.
Yeah, I always this yeah, actually, thanks for pointing that out. This is the L90. So basically you take, oh geez, it's around my neck, so I'm not going to be able to get it to show, but it's a little angled shape, and it's for EMF harmonization. And so you literally put those shapes on the Wi-Fi router. And matter of fact, I got the Biogeometry Home Kit, and I set it up in my mom's house because she sleeps next to her router. Finally, after years, she allowed me to get a $7 outlet timer and at least have it turn off at 9 p.m. or whatever it is and turn back on in the morning. But she is still blasted by that thing all day, every day. And I'll tell you what, man, so wild. Like, my mom doesn't feel anything, doesn't believe in any of this stuff, and kind of rolls her eyes when I bring it up. But I put 2 L90 stickers on the Wi-Fi router, and she went through an immediate detox. She actually had to sit down. She said, I feel really weird. And I asked Holland Franklin about it, and she said, yeah, your mom's body is probably finally shedding all that charge that just built up over years, and people do go through a detox process.
Dang.
And I felt it shift too. And like, I wouldn't say I'm the most sensitive of guys. I know people that don't need a pendulum, they don't need a dowsing rod, they can literally just feel stuff, which is awesome. I'm not one of them, but I felt it. It's the best. I think one of the stickers or a pack of 2 is like $8.25 or something. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
At least you can try it and see if it works.
Yeah, exactly. I'm curious if there's any way that you can demonstrate something very simple that
Sure.
actually kind of shows this in action.
I can. Yeah, I can actually. Let me think here.
Sorry to put you on the spot, but
No.
I think
This
that'd
is
be
good.
really cool.
There's so many ways I can demonstrate it. I want to think what would show up on video the most. Why don't we do the Lequer antenna, and let's set it for. Let's do this. Okay. So is that plant visible behind me? Yeah,
Yes.
this one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to do a setting for EMF, which is 7.8. So I'm going to take this little slider here, and is that in focus?
Yes, it
Yep.
is.
I'm going to slide it to 7.8. Okay. So this is now in resonance with electrical fields, basically. And it's transmitting that out of the bottom. Let's see if these holes show up. I can't quite get it in focus. But this thing picks it up on the bottom. So let me turn around here. And so I'll check the plant for an electrical field. Now, this is an interesting one because there's a lot of electricity going on, but I'll point it right at the plant and we'll see if it moves. So I'm holding it like you would hold a dowsing rod. So if you like the traditional water dowsers or water witchers, as they're called sometimes, they use a Y rod. This is based on a Y rod, and so it flips like that when they walk over water. So let's try this. So I'm pointing it here, and I'm not getting any movement. And I don't know if you can tell, but I'm holding this thing really tight. You can see how my palms are kind of white.
Yep.
I'm doing that to show that I'm not holding it loose to flop. Okay. So now let's find something with an electrical field. Like this is my laptop right here. You can't see it, but let me see if I can. Now let's just do it like this. It should still pick it up. So I'm going to go from the left and see if it dips down. Boom. There it goes. So I'm going to hold it even tighter. Bam. There it goes. I'll try to get it more in view here. And there it goes. I'm holding that really tight.
I can actually see that. That's awesome.
And it's moving down because at this setting it's in resonance with EMF. And so it's resonant. Now I'm going to change the setting to 17.6. 17.6 is a regenerative quality. So you can measure on 17.6. Like for instance, if I measure vitamin C on this setting, 17.6, it'll indicate a strong signal because vitamin C is like very regenerative. But if I do measure it aspartame, it won't even move because it's like a neurotoxin. So let's measure the laptop at 17.6 and see if this is a regenerating quality. It won't even budge. It's not moving at all. It's just bam. Not moving. So I'll put it back on 7.8, the electrical field right here. I'm holding it tight. I come in from the left. There it goes. It goes down. So another really easy example that we can do is you can check the energy quality of a room with a pendulum. So you want it to be clockwise, which adds energy in. It spins energy in. Mm-hmm. When it's counterclockwise, it spins energy out. It flings the energy off because it's going counterclockwise and just flings it off. Spin in, spins energy in. Clockwise, counterclockwise, spins energy out. I wish I could give you a better explanation of that, but in the subtle energy world, that's kind of like a universal law for the most part. Mm-hmm. Beneficial things are clockwise, non-beneficial things that take energy are counterclockwise. So again, just using this pendulum, I'm just going to put it up here and I'm literally just saying what's going to happen here. I'm measuring the energy quality of this room. And there it goes left. And now it's going to switch direction and go right. And it always does this in the presence of Wi-Fi because the Wi-Fi signal switches. Wi-Fi actually has a clockwise spin, but then it goes counterclockwise. And you can see this is constantly switching. I'm not moving. I'm holding as still as possible. And there is a whole argument against using the pendulum. It says it's based on these micro movements of the hand. There's a term for it. I can't remember, but it does require the human nervous system for this to work. If I hung this on a copper rod mounted on a wooden base and just stuck it up there, it wouldn't move at all because it's not energized by my nervous system. And a lot of people have a problem with that, and that's okay. You know, I mean,
I'm sure there's a way you could sort of anchor your hand where you're still holding it, but you've got your like elbow on something and you're sort of stabilizing it a little bit.
I do that all the time. Yeah, I mean, I can put my elbow down on the table. That's not really, let me tilt the camera down here so you can see my elbows on the table. And it'll do the same thing. There it goes left. And now it's going to go right. That's Wi-Fi. Holland Franklin taught me that because I was really confused when it would do that, because I got really into measuring the energy qualities of the rooms I was in. This one is typically pretty bad, by the way. But I use it anyway. And yeah, that's a Wi-Fi thing.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap it up, man. We've covered a lot of ground here today, and I'm sure we'll continue this series. I'm certainly up for it, and I hope people are getting value from it as well. I know health isn't something everyone is interested in, but at the end of the day, I'm putting the information out there that I think is valuable, and pretty applicable to everyone, whether they're interested in it or not. At least I'm doing my part in putting it out there for free for people if they want it. So if you did enjoy this episode and get value, again, the best and easiest way to support the channel is to drop a like below, engage, comment, share, subscribe, of course, if you're not already subscribed, covering all of the vital information to being a free and empowered human being here on planet Earth. And yeah, I think that's going to wrap us up. So before we close up, Theo, let people know what you'd like them to know, where they can find your stuff or get your BioRecharge, which I will just go ahead and say highly, highly recommend that.
I'm always happy to chat with people. My email is theo@forgottenhealth.com. So Theo, Theo, at forgottenhealth.com. And the clue's in the name. I love esoteric, practical health stuff that's kind of been forgotten. And for BioRecharge, if you want to check that out, that's an all American made, even the packaging, American made and sourced humic powder, which you mix in with your water. And it's like a battery charger for your cells. It charges your cells up and detoxes them.
And I will put those links below just for convenience.
Yeah, I appreciate that. But yeah, if you want to shoot me an email, even if it's like, hey, this is terrible and I don't believe you, shoot it over. I want to hear it. It's like I have fun dialogue with everybody, and I do 100% of all my own email. I do not outsource that. And I look forward to hearing from you.
There you go. Hit them up. Alrighty, man. Thanks again for jumping on here. Always just a hell of a ride through history and science and the esoteric side of things and everything in between. So I love this. It was a really fun chat. Of course, thanks as always. And we'll see everybody next time. But until then, be empowered, inspired, and encouraged. Take care.